Negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine are no longer of interest to Donald Trump's administration. Analysts have come to this conclusion after analyzing the latest messages coming from the White House. For example, the fact that Donald Trump's special envoys Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff are in no hurry to visit Kyiv, because Washington is not sure that US participation in negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine will lead to any results. Alright, the visit of Witkoff and Kushner was cancelled in April, but negotiations could at least be held at a technical level. But even here there's a problem. The Embassy of Ukraine in the US stated today that Ukraine still hasn't received a response from the US to President Volodymyr Zelensky's proposal to hold negotiations in Kyiv at the level of technical groups. And on top of that, the Trump administration didn't include funding for military aid to Ukraine in the action program, which has been in effect since 2016 in the draft defense budget for 2027. That's why Volodymyr Zelensky is increasingly looking toward Turkey as a more reliable mediator in the negotiations. My name is Alexei Pichi, let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pichi News. It's in this video's description. We post breaking news there as soon as it comes in. So, negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine with US mediation seem to be finally reaching a dead end and fading into oblivion. Donald Trump's special envoys, Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff, are in no hurry to visit Kyiv, as Washington is not sure that US participation in negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine will lead to the desired results. This was reported by the Ukrainian English-language publication The Kyiv Independent, citing sources, and next I'll quote them. "They promised to visit Kyiv many times but have not done so yet," said a high-ranking Ukrainian official. There were months-long internal discussions about a possible trip, which would be Kushner and Witkoff's first visit to Ukraine. This visit was supposed to serve as a catalyst for resuming the trilateral negotiations between Russia, Ukraine, and the US on ending the war, which have essentially reached a deadlock. They have been put on hold. They've been on hold for more than 2 months because US attention shifted to the war in Iran. But what is preventing Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff from visiting Kyiv? It turned out that both of Trump's special envoys are still deeply involved in negotiations between the US and Iran, which continue to dominate Washington's foreign policy agenda. That's obvious. Since Ukraine's skies have been closed since the war began, negotiators must find another way to get there. At the same time, both the pursuers and the presidents crossed the Polish-Ukrainian border and then took a train to Kyiv, but this is difficult for Stephen Witkoff, who is no longer young. He is already 69 years old. It's hard for him to travel by train. However, what the American side fears most is that a possible visit by Witkoff and Kushner to Kyiv will finally expose the real deadlock in the negotiations caused by the impossibility for Moscow and Kyiv to reach a compromise on the issue of territories. Because the Russians insist that they want to take all of Donbass and say that Ukraine should give it to them. Ukraine's position is to find an acceptable solution. That's why the White House decided that it's unclear why Trump's envoys should travel so far just to hear what they've already heard. At the same time, Trump has already said 100 times that there's progress and that an agreement is just around the corner. In reality, of course, there isn't any. And now a White House spokesperson said that, of course, communication between Kyiv and Washington hasn't stopped completely. And a Ukrainian official said that Ukraine is looking for new formats to intensify cooperation with the US. But what's surprising here is Zelensky's position, because the president of Ukraine recently accused Kushner and Witkoff of disrespecting Ukraine. He stated that it is absolutely disrespectful to go to Moscow and not come to Kyiv. Zelensky emphasized that he understands the difficulties of coming to a country at war, but reminded that other politicians still somehow manage to come to Kyiv, especially European ones. Even Joe Biden visited Kyiv after the full-scale war began. And most importantly, he stated, quote, that this is necessary not for us, but for them. At the same time, the Ukrainian embassy in the US stated that Ukraine has not yet received a response from the US to President Volodymyr Zelensky's proposal to hold negotiations in Kyiv, even at the level of technical groups. The reason was the war in Iran and Donald Trump's misunderstanding of the causes of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And next, I will quote from the statement of the Ukrainian embassy in the US. As of today, the Ukrainian side continues to consider our proposal and we are waiting for a response. As soon as we hear about their readiness to hold the next round of negotiations, rest assured that we will immediately begin preparations for it. Kyiv understands that right now Washington's attention is largely focused on the situation in the Middle East. At the same time, the Ukrainian side hopes that after this, the US focus will return to Ukraine. This is important because we have one priority. We want to end this war justly, and to make sure that it never happens again. But interestingly, it seems there is less and less hope pinned on Donald Trump's team. The day before, the administration of US President Donald Trump did not include funding for military aid to Ukraine under the USA program, which has been in effect since 2016 in the draft defense budget for 2027. There was a meager $400 million allocated there each year, but even that amount Trump crossed out. And by the way, I'll note that the cost of building a ballroom at the White House is $400 million. These are the priorities of the American president today. At the same time, the total amount of the discussed US defense spending for 2027 is about $1.5 trillion. This is actually a record level, exceeding the current one by 50%. And in that total, there was no room for $400 million for Ukraine. At the same time, CBS News, citing sources familiar with internal assessments by American officials, reported that since February 28, the US has spent about $50 billion on Operation Epic Fury against Iran. And against this backdrop, the publication Politico points out that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, is already considering Turkey as a possible venue for the next round of negotiations with the Russians. Zelensky is clearly showing caution regarding the future involvement of the US and is counting on Turkey's role as the venue for future discussions. And as I mentioned in previous episodes, it's important to pay close attention to the increasingly frequent criticism from the Ukrainian president towards the United States, in particular regarding the issues of disrespectful treatment of Ukraine and the decision to ease energy sector sanctions against Russia. And also to how actively Zelensky is now making visits to Europe, the Middle East, and even to Armenia and Azerbaijan, building completely new partnerships which emphasizes that there is no longer much hope pinned on America. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. Also, if you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid membership using the links and details in the description of this video. I would appreciate any support from you. You can also use the QR code on your screens. It's the easiest and most convenient way to support the YouTube channel. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.